wasn't waiting for a floor. He was waiting for peace. The hallway was quiet, but it wasn't empty. A man sat motionless beside the elevator on the 12th floor of a luxury hotel in Memphis. His head was bowed, elbows resting on his knees, fingers laced like he was holding something sacred. Though his hands were empty, the carpet beneath his feet was worn from years of foot traffic. But tonight, no one was coming or going. Not at this hour. Not at this wait. Because the man waiting wasn't just anyone. He was a king. But tonight, he looked more like a shadow trying to remember its shape. Elvis hadn't said a word in hours. He hadn't touched a guitar in days. He hadn't opened a curtain in weeks. He had simply walked out of his suite, barefoot and in a robe, and sat down beside the elevator, without a bag, without a plan, without telling anyone. And he waited. At 2:14 a.m., a hotel staff member rounded the corner, holding a clipboard and a coffee he wouldn't get to drink. He stopped mid-step. There he was, Elvis Presley, not surrounded by bodyguards, not on stage, not laughing or shaking hands or signing autographs, just sitting, still, silent. The staffer cleared his throat. "Mr. Presley, is everything all right?" Elvis didn't look up, didn't move. Then, in a voice quieter than the hum of the hallway, "I'm just waiting." The elevator lights blinked overhead. 1, 2, 3, nothing. No one had called it. The hotel staffer looked confused. "Waiting for what, sir?" A long pause, almost too long. Then Elvis slowly turned his face, his eyes dull but vast, and said, "An elevator." Another pause, but this one doesn't go to rooms. The young man swallowed, smiled nervously. "We only have one elevator here, sir." Elvis looked back down at the carpet. "That's what you think." The staffer didn't know what to say. He stood there a moment longer, unsure whether to leave or call someone. Eventually, he just nodded awkwardly and stepped away, the click of his shoes growing distant. Elvis remained, still as stone. He stared at the metal doors in front of him like they were church doors. Not yet open, not yet ready, not yet earned. He thought about his mama, her voice, her eyes when she watched him sing as a boy, not in Vegas, not on Ed Sullivan, in Tupelo, in church, when he wasn't famous yet, when he was just hers. He thought about Lisa Marie, her laugh, the time she colored him a picture of a rocket ship and said, "This is you, Daddy. You live in the sky." He thought about the screaming fans, the endless noise, and how none of it sounded like home. Time passed strangely. He didn't check his watch, didn't count the minutes, just watched the elevator door, waiting. Because what Elvis Presley was waiting for that night wasn't something you could ride, wasn't something you could press a button for. He was waiting for something far more rare. Stillness, forgiveness, peace. And if it ever arrived, he wanted to be ready. The button that was never pressed. He wasn't lost. He just didn't want to arrive anywhere anymore. At 3:12 a.m., the corridor lights flickered once, just enough to momentarily shift the shadows. The humming of the overhead bulbs returned to its usual rhythm. But Elvis noticed a glitch. He looked up, as if something had blinked. The elevator panel above the door remained still. No arrow, no numbers, no sound. His hands were clasped between his knees, not from cold, but from habit, a habit he hadn't needed in years. The kind of posture you only fall into when you're waiting for someone you know won't come, but part of you still hopes they do. No one else was in the hallway. No fans. No music. No suits and ties. Only the echo of distant air conditioning vents and the hollow silence of a man who once sang louder than life. He leaned his head back against the wall and closed his eyes. For a moment, he wasn't 42. He was 11, and his mama was tucking in his shirt, spitting on her fingers and brushing back his hair before Sunday service. He hated when she did that, but he missed it now. He missed being small. He missed not having to be Elvis Presley all the time. Somewhere in the building, someone dropped a tray. It clanged. He didn't flinch, because Elvis had spent the last decade being applauded by people who didn't know him. and being forgotten by the ones who did. He opened his eyes and looked at the elevator button again. It had never been pressed. And yet he waited, as if the doors would open on their own, as if somewhere behind those metal panels, someone was assembling a moment he wouldn't have to explain, a moment where he didn't have to perform, a moment where he could just step in and go home. He reached into the pocket of his robe and pulled out a matchbook, a hotel matchbook, worn, only 2 matches left. He didn't smoke anymore. Not really, but sometimes he lit them just to see something burn slowly, to remind himself that even a small flame has a beginning and an end. He struck one, watched it flicker, watched it die. The hallway smelled like sulfur and memory. He began humming, a gospel tune, one he hadn't sung on stage in years, one his mama used to hum while folding laundry. He didn't remember all the words, just the feeling, just the ache. At 3:29 a.m., the same hotel staffer passed by again. He stopped. This time, he didn't ask questions. He just stood there, watching, because something about the scene didn't feel like reality. It felt like a moment between worlds. Elvis looked up at him slowly and smiled, a tired, honest, human smile. "Still waiting," he said softly. The staffer nodded, didn't speak, didn't blink, just nodded. Elvis tilted his head. "Funny thing," he said, "I used to run from hotel to hotel just to avoid standing still. Now," he added, "now all I want is for this one door to open. Just once. Quietly. Just for me." And then he paused. His eyes looked past the man down the empty hallway. But I think maybe the elevator only comes when you stop looking for it. The staffer swallowed, his throat dry. He wanted to say something, anything, but nothing seemed worthy. So he just sat down on the floor across from him. 2 men, one known by millions, one no one would ever know, both sitting in silence, waiting for an elevator that no one had called. The floor he never asked for. Some men wait for success. Some men wait for love. That night, Elvis waited for forgiveness. The hallway was colder now, not in temperature, but in memory. Each tile on the floor beneath him felt older somehow, like time was quietly pulling away the shine. The walls, once glowing with warm hotel light, now looked like faded snapshots, like the photos in his childhood drawer, curled at the edges, too fragile to touch. He adjusted his robe, not because he was cold, but because his body no longer knew what to do with comfort. It was 4:03 a.m. The staffer had left. The silence returned. Only this time, it wasn't empty. It had weight, like something was coming, or something was leaving. Elvis tilted his head back against the wall and closed his eyes again. And for a moment, he was in Tupelo. He saw his mama's hands, rough but soft, folded his clothes while singing softly to herself. He saw the church pews, the wooden floors, the barefoot boys. He remembered holding a cold microphone for the first time at age 10, barely tall enough to reach it, and how the sound of his own voice through the speaker made his chest flutter with something he couldn't name. Not power, not pride, presence. He remembered thinking, this is what being real must feel like. But that was a long time ago, long before fame became armor, long before people cheered for a version of him that even he didn't recognize anymore, long before he traded silence for noise. Back in the hallway, his eyes opened slowly. The elevator still hadn't moved. He hadn't pressed the button. He never intended to, because this wasn't a place to go somewhere. It was a place to let go of something. He looked down at his hands. They trembled now and then, not from fear, not even from age, but from fatigue too deep for sleep to cure. He had shaken 1,000,000 hands, signed 1,000,000 autographs. But when was the last time someone held his hand without expecting anything? The silence was broken by a soft mechanical hum, the sound of the vending machine at the end of the hall kicking on for no reason. Elvis smiled. Machine still worked. People, not always. Then something strange happened. He stood up, slowly, stiffly, but not aimlessly. He walked toward the elevator and placed his hand gently on the brushed steel door. Not to open it, not to knock, just to touch it, like confession whispered to a locked church. "If you're not coming," he said softly, "then I need to say this here." He leaned his forehead against the metal. The chill ran through his skin. His voice trembled as he spoke. "I know I disappointed her. I know I chased the world more than I chased what mattered. And I know I stayed alive for the crowd when I should have stayed alive for my little girl." His breath fogged the door. "But if you're still listening, I'm still here." He stepped back and smiled, not with joy, but with peace. The kind of smile you give when you've told the truth, even if no one hears it. He walked back to his seat, sat again, his body sinking heavier now. He whispered something else, so soft, the hallway couldn't carry it. "I'm not waiting for floor. I'm waiting to feel light again." And for the first time that night, he closed his eyes not to escape, but to rest. He stopped waiting. That's when it started coming. Some doors don't open because you pressed a button. Some open when you finally stop trying. It was now past 5 a.m. Elvis hadn't moved in over an hour. His body had settled into a quiet slouch, arms resting loosely on his lap, head tilted slightly toward his right shoulder. To anyone walking by, he might have looked asleep, but he wasn't. He was more awake than he'd been in years. Just not here. He was back in a dressing room. The kind with light bulbs around the mirror, sweat-stained towels, and paper cups full of lukewarm cola. He could hear the band warming up. Someone was knocking on the door. He didn't answer, because he was staring at his own reflection, at the version of himself that everyone wanted to see. The hair perfect, the smile rehearsed, the eyes hollow. He remembered whispering to the mirror, "Don't forget to move at the third chorus. Don't forget to laugh when they throw the teddy bear. Don't forget who they think you are." He snapped back to the hallway, back to now, where there was no audience, no band, no manager waiting with cue cards, only the hum of the building and the slow pulse in his temples. He sighed, a long, aching sigh, not from pain, from acceptance. He looked again at the elevator. For a moment, he wondered if it had ever worked at all, or if the whole world had just been waiting with him. He whispered, "Maybe this hallway isn't a hallway. Maybe it's the in-between." He didn't mean purgatory. He didn't mean anything from the Bible. He meant something quieter than that. A space between breathing and stopping, between being seen and being remembered. He thought of the people he used to carry, the ones who drained him dry, the ones who asked for more when he had nothing left to give, the ones who said, "It's just one more show." And he thought of the ones he left behind, his daughter, his mama, his little brother who never made it past birth. He felt them now, not as memories, as presence, like they were sitting across from him in the hallway, not saying a word, just being there, like he had been for so many people, for so long. He leaned his head back and said aloud, "I think I'm ready now. Not to go, not to stay, just to be okay." And then the elevator dinged. The light above the door flickered. A single number appeared, G. Ground floor. Not heaven, not hell, just stillness. The doors didn't open, but the light stayed on, long enough for Elvis to smile. "I hear you," he whispered. "I'm coming, but not tonight. Tonight, I needed to say goodbye to myself first." He closed his eyes. No fear, no tears, just that quiet glow behind the eyelids that only comes when a man's heart stops running. And finally, sits down. He died 1,000 times before he ever left the building. Some men wait for death. He waited to feel alive one last time. It was now past 6 a.m. The hallway hadn't changed. Same dim lights. Same motionless elevator. Same man slouched quietly in a silence that no longer felt empty, but sacred. Elvis hadn't spoken in over an hour, but he'd said more in his stillness than 1,000 sold-out shows ever could. Because the truth was, he had died 1,000 little deaths before this night ever came. Each time he shook a hand with a fake smile. Each time he was handed pills instead of peace. Each time someone told him, "You're not him anymore. And yet, he kept going, not because he believed in it, but because he was afraid of what would happen if he stopped. Now he had stopped, and the world hadn't ended, just slowed, like breath between songs. He turned his face slowly toward the hallway wall. There, hanging crookedly, was a mirror, hotel standard, thin, borderless, lifeless. But in it, he saw something he hadn't seen in years. His own reflection, without the costume. No rhinestones, no flair, no legend. Just a man with tired eyes and a voice that no longer needed to be loud to be true. He whispered to himself. They cheered for Crown, but I just wanted to be the boy my mama prayed for. The hallway buzzed faintly. Somewhere deep in the hotel, the staff was starting to stir. Trays clinked. Voices mumbled. Life resumed. But this hallway still belonged to him. A waiting room between body and soul. He closed his eyes again. And this time, he wasn't in Tupelo. He wasn't in Vegas. He wasn't anywhere the maps could name. He was in a church with no roof. A stage with no lights. A place where time didn't exist. And in front of him stood himself. Not as he was, as he had been. 16. Sweaty palms. A cheap guitar and a throat full of doubt. And that younger version looked up at him and said, "We made it, huh?" Elvis smiled. "Yeah," he said, "we made it, but I lost you along the way." The younger version stepped forward. "You didn't lose me. You just let too many people speak louder than you did. I've been waiting for you to come back." Then they sat, back to back, old and young, two versions of the same soul, finally breathing in rhythm again. Back in the hallway, a tear slipped down Elvis's cheek, but he wasn't crying. He was reuniting. He whispered one final time, "I don't want to be remembered for being seen. I want to be remembered for feeling real." The elevator dinged again. Same soft chime. Same letter glowing, G. It didn't open. It didn't need to, because he finally understood. The elevator was never taking him anywhere. It had come to witness, not to deliver him, but to remind him that he could leave without running. And so he leaned back against the wall, let the robe slide slightly off his shoulder, let the weight settle in, let the breath slow. And for the first time in a lifetime of voices yelling his name, he didn't need anyone to call out to him. He just needed silence. He didn't leave the building. He left the wait. The hallway didn't change. But something inside him did. It was past 7 a.m. The sunrise had started to bleed through the cracks in the heavy curtains down the hallway, turning the edges of the wallpaper golden. But he didn't move. Elvis sat exactly where he had been for hours, beside the elevator. Only now, he wasn't waiting. He was remembering. His eyes were open, but soft, like someone looking through water. Not seeing the hallway, but something beyond it. Something old. Something honest. Something lost. He was back in the passenger seat of his first car. His mama was driving, radio playing faintly. He was 17, thin, nervous, unsure if this voice inside him, would ever matter. He looked at her then and asked a question he'd never asked again in his life. "Do you think they'll ever listen to me?" She hadn't answered right away. She just reached over, taken his hand, and squeezed. "They'll listen," she said, "but promise me, you won't forget how you sound to yourself." He did forget, and now he was trying to remember. The elevator light dinged again. No button had been pressed. No door open. Just a familiar, ghostly G glowing above him. It felt less like a machine now, and more like a message, a reminder that there are places you don't get to by pushing metal, only by letting go of what's holding you down. He turned his head slowly and looked at his reflection in the brass of the elevator door. Not sharp, not clear, but there, a blur. And for the first time in years, he smiled at it, because he didn't hate that man anymore. The man who made mistakes. The man who stayed too long on too many stages. The man who couldn't say no when he needed to scream it. He forgave him, and in that forgiveness, the silence felt holy. Suddenly he stood. It was slow, careful, but not weak. He walked down the hallway, not away from the elevator, but past it, to the very last door on the floor. Room 1227. His room. The one he hadn't stepped back into all night. He paused, placed his palm on the wood, breathed in, and whispered, "I think I'm done being someone for everyone else." Then he opened the door. The room was dark. Unmade bed, open Bible, turntable spinning, but silent. He stepped in, closed the door behind him. No one saw him do it. No one filmed it. No flashbulbs. No screams. No curtain calls. He walked to the piano in the corner. Saturday. Let his fingers fall gently onto the keys. Didn't play. Just touched. Just felt. Just was. He whispered something. No one will ever know what it was. Maybe a prayer. Maybe a goodbye. Maybe, finally, his voice. Then he stood, walked to the bed, laid down, faced the window, and just exhaled. One last time. Not with sorrow, but with peace. Because that night, Elvis didn't leave the building. He left the wait. The silence that followed the music. He wasn't just waiting for an elevator. He was waiting for the world to stop asking him to be more than he already was. For years, the world screamed his name, even when he didn't want to hear it. For years, they dressed like him, walked like him, moved like him, but they never asked what it felt like to be him. They called him the king. But what they never understood is that the crown weighed more than any man should carry. It sparkled on stage. But in the dark, it cut. He gave them songs. He gave them movement. He gave them everything. But what he kept hidden was the one thing they would never hear, his silence. Because when the lights went off, when the crowd went home, when the sequins were unzipped and the pills kicked in, he became just a man again. A man who sang gospel because it reminded him of his mama. A man who sat alone at night because applause couldn't hold his hand. A man who wasn't afraid to die. He was afraid to be forgotten before he did. But maybe he knew something we didn't. Maybe that hallway wasn't just a hallway. Maybe the elevator wasn't broken. Maybe it was a test, not of strength, but of surrender. He didn't press the button, because what he waited for wasn't on the floor. It was in himself. And when he stood up, when he left that hallway, when he walked into that room and closed the door behind him, he didn't leave to escape. He left to rest. There was no final concert, no farewell tour, no stage dive into legend. Just a man, a robe, a breath, and finally, no need to perform. So no, he didn't leave the building. He became the silence it now holds. He isn't gone. He's just quiet now. Candle, thank you for listening. Let the silence say what he no longer could. This isn't just a channel. This is a home for voices that were never fully heard. Here at Silent Stories, we don't chase clicks. We chase meaning. We tell the stories that faded into the noise. We give space to legends, not for how loudly they lived, but for how silently they endured. If you're the kind of person who listens between the words, if you believe that silence can speak louder than applause, then you belong here. Subscribe, stay, listen, and together we'll keep remembering those the world almost forgot.